A woman is found murdered, the crime scene chaotic, the physical clues scarce. But on her skin, investigators find a faint crescent-shaped bruise. It is a detail that will seal a man's fate, sending him to death row. This shadow of violence was presented to a jury not as a mere clue, but as an absolute, undeniable signature. It was the ultimate illusion of certainty, wrapped in the authoritative cloak of science. For decades, the discipline of forensic dentistry claimed a staggering superpower. Experts testified under oath that they could match a bite mark on a victim to a suspect's teeth with the exact same precision as a fingerprint. They asserted that human dentition is entirely unique and that human skin perfectly captures and preserves this unique pattern. Juries listened, captivated by the absolute confidence of these professionals. Investigating this claim with rigorous logic, however, reveals a house of cards. Human skin is an incredibly poor canvas for recording impressions. It is elastic, it swells, it distorts with movement, and it decays. A bite mark changes shape the moment it is inflicted, altering further as the body heals or perishes. The foundational premise of the entire field was physically and biologically flawed from the very beginning. To understand how this flaw infiltrated the justice system, we have to look at the desperation of criminal investigations in the 1970s. Detectives working brutal, unsolved homicides needed a silver bullet. When a suspect was apprehended, investigators sought any tool to definitively link them to the victim. Bite mark analysis offered a convenient, seemingly scientific bridge between the suspect in custody and the violence of the crime scene. The legal system operates on the powerful engine of precedent. Once a single appellate court allowed bite mark evidence to be presented to a jury, a dangerous domino effect began. Other judges, lacking scientific training, simply deferred to that initial ruling. If another court deemed it acceptable, it must be valid. This created a closed loop of legal validation entirely devoid of independent, empirical scientific testing. Courtroom evidence quickly evolved into high-stakes theater. Forensic dentists arrived with impressive credentials, carrying elaborate plaster casts of suspects' teeth and transparent acetate overlays of the victim's wounds. They would place the overlay on the cast, pointing out supposed matches in the alignment of incisors and canines. To a lay jury, the visual presentation was overwhelming, effectively masking the extreme subjectivity of the underlying analysis. The methodology of bite mark analysis was dangerously subjective. There were no standardized protocols for how many points of comparison were required to declare a definitive match. It was entirely up to the individual examiner's discretion. Furthermore, the process of creating the overlays and measuring the bruises involved a high degree of manipulation. Experts could, consciously or unconsciously, interpret ambiguous bruising to fit the suspect's dental profile. This subjectivity opened the door wide to cognitive bias. In many cases, law enforcement identified their prime suspect first. They would then send that specific suspect's dental molds to the forensic dentist, asking if it matched the victim's bite mark. The expert was not examining a blind lineup of teeth. They were looking at a single suspect, knowing the police already believed this person was the killer. The human cost of this circular logic was catastrophic. Across the country, innocent people were chained to crimes they did not commit, their lives dismantled by the testimony of a single expert. The reliance on this unverified technique led directly to a wave of wrongful convictions. While innocent citizens were locked in prison cells, the actual perpetrators remained free, continuing to pose a severe threat to public safety. Consider the historical cases where suspects were convicted largely because of their unique dental features. A suspect with a crooked tooth or a slight gap would be targeted because the victim had an irregular bruise. The prosecution would build their entire narrative around this single, distorted mark. The defense attorneys, lacking the technical knowledge to dismantle the junk science, often found themselves helpless against the expert's absolute certainty. The verdicts were swift and devastating. Juries instructed to weigh the evidence naturally deferred to the men in suits wielding complex terminology. Life sentences and death penalties were handed down based on what amounted to a sophisticated guess. The justice system had effectively outsourced its truth-seeking mandate to a discipline that had never bothered to prove its own foundational reliability through rigorous, double-blind scientific studies. The turning point in this dark chapter of forensics arrived with the advent of DNA profiling. In the late 1980s and 1990s, criminal investigations gained access to a genuinely objective tool. Unlike the subjective interpretation of a bruise, a biological profile extracted from blood, semen, or saliva offered a mathematical certainty. DNA did not rely on an expert's opinion. It relied on the immutable laws of genetics. Armed with this revolutionary technology, organizations like the Innocence Project began a massive undertaking. They started reviewing old, closed cases, specifically hunting for violent crimes where biological evidence had been collected but never properly tested. Their mission was to apply modern scientific rigor to the forgotten archives of the justice system, searching for the truth hidden within decaying evidence boxes. A violent collision between objective science and subjective opinion was inevitable. In case after case, the Innocence Project secured court orders to test the DNA found in the saliva left on the very bite marks that had secured the original convictions. The results were explosive. The genetic profiles extracted from the bite marks completely excluded the men who had been convicted by the forensic dentists. The biological truth exposed the systemic flaw with undeniable clarity. Men who had spent decades in maximum security prisons, branded as monsters, were entirely exonerated. The DNA proved that the supposed perfect matches presented in court were nothing more than tragic illusions. The forensic experts had looked at a distorted bruise and confidently identified the wrong man, completely blind to their own devastating errors. This revelation was not merely an indictment of a few rogue experts. It exposed a profound, systemic legal failure. The courts have a fundamental duty to act as gatekeepers, ensuring that only reliable, scientifically valid evidence reaches the jury box. In the case of bite mark analysis, the gatekeepers had completely abandoned their post, allowing junk science to masquerade as established fact for over 3 decades. The legal framework for admitting scientific testimony, often governed by standards like the Daubert standard, requires judges to evaluate whether a technique has been tested, peer-reviewed, and possesses a known error rate. Yet when it came to forensic dentistry, judges routinely bypassed these rigorous requirements. They relied on the inertia of past rulings, prioritizing legal tradition over the urgent necessity of scientific validation. As the exonerations mounted, the forensic dentistry community faced a profound existential crisis. Admitting the fatal flaw in their methodology meant accepting responsibility for destroying innocent lives. Consequently, many practitioners fiercely resisted the DNA findings. They attempted to rationalize the contradictions, arguing that the DNA must have been contaminated or that the suspect was present but someone else inflicted the bite. The mounting controversy finally drew the attention of the highest levels of the scientific establishment. The National Academy of Sciences launched a comprehensive review, investigating the scientific validity of various forensic disciplines. This was a critical moment. Independent, highly credentialed scientists were finally turning their analytical gaze onto the techniques that law enforcement had utilized without question for generations. When the National Academy published its landmark report, the findings regarding bite mark analysis were devastating. The committee concluded that there was absolutely no scientific foundation to support the claim that a bite mark on human skin could be definitively matched to a single, specific individual. They found no established error rates, no standardized protocols, and a severe lack of empirical testing to back up the bold claims made in court. The report sent a massive shockwave through the criminal justice system. It was a formal, authoritative declaration that a primary pillar of forensic evidence was fundamentally unsound. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges were forced to confront a terrifying reality. The foundation of thousands of closed cases, many involving the most severe penalties imaginable, was built on sand. The integrity of past verdicts was suddenly thrown into deep doubt. The aftermath triggered a grueling legal struggle to undo the damage. Defense attorneys began filing writs of habeas corpus, a fundamental legal maneuver used to challenge unlawful detentions. They argued that their clients were imprisoned based on discredited science, violating their constitutional right to a fair trial. However, exposing the flaw was only the first step. Navigating the complex machinery of post-conviction relief proved to be a monumental challenge. The American justice system is inherently designed to prioritize finality over correction. Once a jury delivers a guilty verdict and the appeals are exhausted, overturning a conviction requires clearing incredibly high procedural hurdles. Even when presented with definitive proof that the underlying forensic evidence was pure junk, appellate courts are often deeply reluctant to reopen old wounds and reverse long-standing decisions. The inertia of law is a powerful force. Despite the friction, some jurisdictions began to adapt. Progressive forensic science commissions, like the one in Texas, conducted their own exhaustive reviews of bite mark analysis. Recognizing the unacceptable risk of wrongful convictions, they took the unprecedented step of recommending a total ban on the use of bite mark evidence in criminal trials. It was a vital step toward realigning the courtroom with actual science. Yet the threat has not been completely eradicated. Because the legal system relies heavily on precedent, the historical rulings that originally allowed bite mark testimony still technically exist on the books in many states. While it is rarely used today, the lack of a universal federal ban means that in certain jurisdictions, an aggressive prosecutor and a willing expert could still attempt to introduce this discredited technique to a jury. The rise and fall of bite mark evidence serves as a critical canary in the coal mine for the broader criminal justice system. It forces us to question other subjective forensic fields that rely on pattern matching, such as hair analysis, tire tread comparison, and even certain types of ballistics profiles. If one discipline could be so fundamentally wrong for so long, the rigorous logic of detection demands we scrutinize them all. True forensic science is not about an expert's intuition or their persuasive courtroom demeanor. It requires empirical validation, established error rates, and rigorous, double-blind testing. The evolution of criminal investigations must continue its shift away from subjective human opinion and toward objective, quantifiable data. The standards for what constitutes proof in a court of law must be tethered to the unyielding laws of the scientific method. The ultimate truth of this investigation is that justice demands more than just a compelling narrative. The catastrophic failure of bite mark evidence is a stark, enduring reminder of the terrible cost of blind faith. When the legal system fails to rigorously interrogate the science it relies upon, the innocent pay the price. Protecting the truth requires constant vigilance, ensuring that the evidence we trust to take away a person's freedom is fundamentally, undeniably real.